listening to Limed, Teaching with a Twist, a podcast that plays with pedagogy. It is that time of year where we are wrapping up our full episodes, preparing some summer refresh episodes, and looking for outstanding guests or topics for future episodes of Limed, Teaching with a Twist. If you have an interesting teaching challenge or idea you want to explore through our podcast, please reach out to me, Matt Wittstein, at MWITTSTEIN at elon.edu. That's mwittstein at elon.edu. Or by filling out our podcast interest form at the bottom of the Center for Engaged Learning's podcast webpage, www.centerforengagedlearning.org/podcasts. This month, Devani Taprani hosts Carla Fullwood, the Director of Inclusive Excellence Education and Development at Elon University. Carla always reflects, and recently has been thinking about how to motivate faculty to engage in self-reflection before they focus on in-the-class strategies that support diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our panel of Tracie Addy, Ethan Lane Blake, and Laura Pipe talk about what motivates their work in this area, the importance of vulnerability, and how understanding your own identity can become an asset in your teaching and learning spaces. Enjoy the episode. Here's Devani Taprani.
Hello, Carla, and welcome to the show. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you, Devani.
So, Carla, tell us a little bit about yourself and what Teaching and Learning Challenge brings you here.
Dr. Carla Fullwood, I use she, her, and hers pronouns. And at Elon, I serve as the Director for Inclusive Excellence Education and Development, right? And so what that means is my role is a little bit different than some traditional faculty development. I do work around faculty development, but not specific around inclusive teaching or like inclusive pedagogy. The work that I do is around personal and professional development with an emphasis on DEI, but really around like the internal work that helps inform how we understanding and approaching our understanding around diversity, equity, and inclusion to then think about how it's going to inform our work in the classroom or in the workplace. When I think about that, my challenge has been how to engage faculty or how to continue to get faculty buy-in around this idea of the internal development around diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Oftentimes, I work with great colleagues who are so focused on, so how can I implement this in the classroom? How can I do this for my students? Where a part of the journey, and there's all of this, research and studies that say, well, part of it is what's the self-work, self-reflection, self-change, the intrinsic work and development and enhancing the critical consciousness that will then inform the work that you do, like your actions. And so really thinking about getting colleagues to stay in that wheelhouse, which can sometimes be a little bit uncomfortable. So really excited to think about what opportunities exist to really engage and get faculty buy-in, more faculty buy-in around that.
That's a very interesting teaching and learning context. So can you tell us more about the nature of faculty members who you are mostly working with, the kind of work that they are doing, which you are trying to influence in turn?
Yeah, so it's expansive, right? Like part of my role is to look at our full faculty and staff community. And so right now I'm connecting with faculty across disciplines but really faculty who may have already some interest, right? Like they may already be engaged in this work in some way and finding ways to deepen. And so how to engage those that aren't thinking about it. this is where, as I appreciate faculty across all disciplines. But there are some disciplines who are like, this doesn't connect to my discipline to even think about this type of work, where it does, right? Because we're still engaging with students or colleagues who are coming into our spaces with different identities who may be affected by what's happening not only in the world but in our campuses around identity, for the complex of systems that's affecting how we are going to come into the classroom and learn and work, right? And so it's thinking about those faculty who may be not engaged, not even thinking this is relevant. Some who may be just honestly outright resistant in the sense of, this doesn't necessarily apply to me, or I don't see myself in this. And so I don't need to think about my personal work, let alone how I'm going to incorporate it in my teaching. And so those are some of the, ultimately working with faculty, I'm looking at working with all of our faculty colleagues.
That's by far one of the most diverse group of learners I have talked to anyone on this podcast. And as they say, teachers are the hardest to teach. So you definitely have a tough population to work with.
Is and I could understand that, right? I feel part of what excites me about this challenge is, we as educators being on a college campus, we have great desires and intentions for our students. And think, like, let's be honest, right? Like, we think about the current climate, like what's happening in our world, particularly around DE and on college campuses. We have some campuses that, are not even allowed now to engage in this type of work. So whether we are encouraged to engage in these topics or not, we are people that comes with identities, whether it's our race, our gender, our faith, our class. And these identities are informing not only how we're learning or teaching, but also how we're interacting or understanding ourselves to then inform how we're going to teach, right? There's like great opportunity to really think about how to delve deeper into this work personally and step out of my comfort zones and step out of, you know, trying to be a little bit more vulnerable to then think about how I could incorporate inclusive practices in my teaching. And so I feel like I'm excited about that work. But then I also recognize that it is challenging, right? When I am faculty that have degrees and credentialed or supposed to, I'm expected to know these things, or may have students who are going to have a level of expectations of me based on my years in my field, in my position, or teaching. And there's that can sometimes pose a challenge to step out of that comfort zone or to be vulnerable in realizing I need to continue to develop around constructs related to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And I'll bring a personal narrative here, Carla, because you and I have worked together in the past. I've attended some of these sessions that you have facilitated. And I know that these sessions can be consumed very subjectively by different people. So, my question to you is, I'm curious, when you are doing this work, how do you define success?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. I think one measure of success for me is, like, quite tangibly, we do feedback, right? And at the end of a session, and when getting feedback, whether it's positive or negative critique, if I can get some type of information or feedback that says this at least helped me think about something that I've never thought about before, whether or not I agree with it, that to me is a level of success.
So tell me a little about the strategies that you have tried already in these spaces and something that has really worked well for you.
So some strategies have been mentioned, like there's workshops. So there's collaborating with offices like our Teaching and Learning Center on our campus. It's called the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning, to get folks, connected with these types of resources. And one of the things that I appreciate, at least with our space here at Elon is a part of their inclusive teaching model. They have a dimension that talks about who we are as teachers. And so that's where I say my partnership with a space like that centers on that component of their inclusive teaching model. I do offer sometimes like some individualized coaching or consultation. There's programs that I offer around dialogues. I find like dialogues are one approach to allow folks to engage in that self-reflection, self-inquiry, really continuing to understand others and other viewpoints. So those are some of the strategies. And, again, some of the challenge is there's these, well, I'm engaging in these to think about how I could incorporate it in the classroom, which again is fine, but it's like, but how are you like actually engaging for your enhancement? Devani, the way that I think about it, and this may not be like the best analogy that makes sense, but I think about, for the most part, as adults, right? We all perhaps have learned to cook eggs in one way, shape, or another. If you know how to cook an egg, there's a difference between just telling somebody or teaching somebody how to cook an egg. If you yourself have never touched an egg, cracked an egg, kind of know the nuances of what may come with frying up that egg for what have you, right? Now, because we probably have learned that ourselves and know like, well, to cook an egg, I could teach somebody and I could tell them this is how they like crack it, but because you've experienced it, sometimes cracking it, the shell falls in the bowl. And so you may want to like pay attention to that. You may want to crack it in a particular way to minimize the shell breaking out. You may want to figure out, it's better to like whisk it with a whisk and not a fork. Like there's things that you have done yourself that helps you understand those nuances that's not necessarily present when just telling somebody this is how you cook an egg. You crack it into a bowl, mix it, pour it in a pan. There's a lot of nuances within those steps that feels a little bit different when you've actually done it yourself.
I'm smiling so widely here because I have never cooked an egg in my life. I am a vegan, so I've never done that. And when you were describing the steps and process, I was like, oh yeah, like you and I have lived a very different life, and that's where what you're saying sounds different to me. I am thinking and reasoning it differently in my head. This was quite a moment here. So to wrap it up, Carla, what I'm hearing you say is that you're really interested in unpacking and understanding how can we motivate this internal work and thought around diversity among our faculty members who are then going out and working with our students, trying to appreciate them, trying to respect where they are coming from, and teach them something, and at the same time learn something from them. And it's a more reciprocal relationship. What you've already tried is collaborating with other centers on campus, encouraging dialogue among faculty members and yourself. So you are interested in hearing more strategies of what others have done to tackle similar problems. Is that a good summary of what you're looking for?
No, I think you've captured it, that learning from others and, that emphasis on the learning to then inform the doing, not just jumping into the doing and teaching, which there's some nuances there, but I think you captured it.
Great, Carla. This sounds very exciting to me. I'm very eager to hear what our panel has got to say. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to hear from some good colleagues and learn about what our approaches that I'm missing. So I look forward to hearing from our panel.
Welcome, everyone. We are here today with our panelists, and I'm excited to get us thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, commonly known as DEI or EDI, for faculty development. And before we get started, panelists, do you mind introducing yourself and sharing what motivates you to continue engaging in the DEI work from your positions?
I'm Laura Pipe, and I direct the Teaching and Learning Center at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. I've been in this role for almost 10 years. I'm also an instructor in kinesiology. I'm a kinesiologist by training. My area is actually sports sociology. And then my research right now in education is heavily focused on decolonial work and what that looks like in higher education, in particular, Indigenous practice and Indigenous pedagogies and epistemologies, heavily influenced by the woodland people here on the east coast of Turtle Island. The reason why I continue to do this work, I'm of Tuscarora descent, part of the Haudenosaunee. So I've grown up in a really interesting conflicted relationship with education. Education for a long time was used as a tool, not just only of assimilation, but one also of genocide for my people. And so there's a lot of trauma related to that. And so for me, this work is really about the responsibility I have as an Indigenous woman to my people, to our community, and to the students who walk through that door. And so all of my work is heavily influenced on how do we make not only higher education accessible, because access without support is not access, in the words of Vince Tinto, but how do we actually create an institution that truly serves the communities and serves the students that come to us for learning. And that's through this work. It's through EDI.
My name is Tracie Addy, and I've had the pleasure to serve as the Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning and Director of the Center for the Integration of Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship at Lafayette College. And now my incoming role will actually be at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, where I will start up the Institute for Teaching, Learning, and Inclusive Pedagogy. So a lot of my work has focused on various aspects of educational development, supporting and partnering with faculty, with students, co-creating knowledge and shared experiences with both and staff as well. And why I'm motivated to do this work? Well, I've always been really passionate about teaching and learning in general and the practices that actually support learning. When I think about my experiences as a faculty member, I know that what you do in the classroom matters, and it matters to students. It matters to, the success in general at institutions. And so a lot of my recent work has been on inclusive teaching. I've done a lot of scholarly work. I do a lot of scholarly work on teaching and learning in general, as well as educational development. And all of that has really wrapped in my values, what I'm passionate about, and what excites me. I also really enjoy working with faculty because of the impact of that work. How many faculty you can partner with can actually impact many, many students, in the long run. So a lot of this work has originated since I was quite young, and I've always been kind of interested in this area. And now I'm just so blessed with the opportunity to be able to do it as my vocation, as my job.
Hello, my name is Ethan Lane Blake. I'm a senior at Elon University, majoring in psychology and human service studies, with also a minor in leadership studies. At Elon, I have numerous roles. I am a student coordinator for the Center for Race, Ethnicity, and Diversity Education, also known as the CREED. I am a Paraclean scholar, independent researcher, and so many other things. What really grounds me or pushes me to want to do more DEI work is honestly my identity. As a Black queer individual, I am intersectionally marginalized. So it is important that I both educate myself and others on what systems of oppression are. What is a microaggression? What is white privilege? Also, my research is on Black queer individuals in the civil rights movement. So right now, what I have worked on is working on a 6-part series that highlights 4 individuals who have been marginalized, who no one really knows of, or if they do know them, they don't know that they're queer. And those people are Pauli Murray, James Baldwin, Valerie Rustin, and Audre Lorde. And so with them, I've learned a lot, not only just about myself, but what needs to change as well. So it is very dear to me. Honestly, I think it's just what motivates me to keep going, honestly, as I continue my education.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing that. I'm really thrilled by our diverse identities and motivations, and I think they will greatly contribute to our guests' learning context. So with that, our guest for this episode is Dr. Carla Fullwood. Director of Inclusive Excellence Education and Development at Elon University. She facilitates learning experiences that help faculty members learn about diverse, equitable, and inclusive learning pedagogies and incorporating them in their teaching practices. The challenge that Carla faces in doing this work is connecting with faculty members who are resistant towards this work because it either doesn't directly connect with their discipline or they are more focused on the teaching strategies coming out of this work. Instances where she has been successful, she's found her learners who are technically faculty members to be focused on adopting the DEI teaching practices without doing the internal work to understand their own positionality as a teacher. Doing so, faculty members may end up with good teaching strategies, but they may not be able to relate to their learners' experience of going through the process because they haven't experienced it themselves. So there's that lack of authenticity. Given how nuanced and subjective this work is, Carla considers learners' discovery of just a novel perspective also as a big success for her. So the first question that I have for all of you is how can we motivate faculty members from disciplines that do not have an explicit connection to the DEI work to engage with these practices?
For my work, I'm situated at a regional access state institution. So that just gives you some context. We're a minority serving, Hispanic serving institution. So that internal work that Carla talks about is so essential, right? You can't do external work if you've not done the internal work. And so a lot of the conversations I have with folks who are in disciplines that they feel like, we're objective. So STEM, math, those spaces oftentimes is a lot about the society we live in, and that it's our job to help students to build a mirror that they can hold up to society. Students are going to make the decision on what they see and how to evaluate it, but we're giving them tools and a toolkit. And so that often is a starting place of thinking about how do those disciplines fit into that mirror that students are building that they can hold up to society. The other piece of this is helping faculty understand the students that they actually serve. So we all have this imagined student that we're developing our courses and our tools for. And oftentimes that is not in alignment with who actually is sitting in front of us. For example, being a regional access institution, we often hire faculty who were hoping to go to a Research 1 institution. They're thinking they're teaching a Research 1 student, and they're not. They're teaching a student who often would be overlooked in those settings. And so they have a different starting place. And so helping faculty truly understand that, which means that if we frame this from a student success perspective, how do we create inclusive classroom experiences to help the students who are in front of us, then we have to address these conversations around EDI because everyone benefits from inclusive teaching. So we use a lot of universal design for learning. It's a concept and a framework that makes a lot of sense to a lot of folks. And so we talk about how the example in universal design often that's given is if we have a door and that's a circular door handle and I'm a pirate with a hook for a hand, I can't open that door, right? But if I make it a lever door handle, now as a pirate with a hook, I can open that door. But if I'm a parent pushing a stroller, I still can't get in. But if I create sliding doors, or if I create, an accessible button that motorizes the opening of the door, now all of a sudden, all of those people can get in, as well as folks who maybe have a mobility device. And the same thing goes for what happens in our classroom, right? If I plan my teaching and my work to address neurodivergent students, to address students who are BIPOC, students who are in a marginalized identity group, then everyone in that room has a better experience. Access becomes better for everyone, not just for the group that I'm working towards. And that language makes sense to folks who haven't necessarily always felt like that was part of the work that they needed to do.
And I'll build off something that Laura mentioned in the beginning with regards to knowing who your students are. So I think that is absolutely critical. And some of our work, we've actually published a form called Who's in Class, and I've been working with faculty with this form. And many instructors will have different ways to get to know their learners. But this is actually something where in the beginning of a course, and we co-created this with students too, that you're actually asking students important information to honor their diversity. And also to think and be responsive to that diversity. And anybody can look up that form, by the way, it's open access. So knowing who your learners are, I think, is an important way to engage in the self-reflective process, because in my experience in working with instructors who actually use this form, and then they find out various interesting things about their students, is that they're like, oh, I never realized that. Oh, I never realized that. And we have these conversations where it encourages them to be reflective and think about, and I say, okay, so well, keeping that in mind and thinking about all of these identities, et cetera, that your students bring, assets, et cetera, to your class and experiences, what can you do to tweak your class, whether you teach STEM, any class, right? This is for all of our students, regardless of the discipline that we teach in. And that has been a really fruitful kind of conversation to really think about it too. Another way I would also say to encourage engagement, and this is a practice that I've used especially in more tailored kind of signature programs, but we also can do it in other types of ways too, with other types of initiatives that we do, is to actually have the instructor think about what they value in terms of what do they hope to see the outcomes of their students and their learning experiences. Because we know when we tie it to people's values, beliefs are hard to change. But if we tie it to people's values and we can kind of integrate this work in, we'll see like, yeah, we want to be successful. I think Laura mentioned this with all of our students. Like, we want to see them successful. Well, so then how can we do this? And I've talked to even some of the most reticent of faculty with this, really drilling down and thinking about, well, then how can we take some small steps to actually move in that direction? So one of the ways I've seen be effective is to do this introspective work, is to actually have instructors think about their learners, right? And to actually get some data on them, right? Like, do these forms, actually learn about them rather than making assumptions. And then make some small goals, for your class, that you could actually just be more inclusive. What could you do to be more inclusive in your class? Because that's going to force them to reflect on what's going on in their class and how their positionalities and how they're thinking about it. And it's nice to also go have a thought partner, like someone like me, right, an educational developer, where you can actually go back and forth and kind of think about these things in a space that's trusting. So those are just a couple of ways that I think can be really helpful to engage instructors. Obviously, there's a number of other things that can motivate people to change behavior, right, and to change their practice. But those are a couple of beginning ones. I do want to allow others to also respond.
I love that, actually. Talking about bringing people's goals and values. I have not thought about it from the perspective of the professor, because I'm a student. But what I have been doing in my role as the intern for the first generation support office is defining what success is and what that looks like for various people. So I think if we connect it to people's values and goals, but also ask them to look beside themselves on what success looks like and what success can be defined as. Success looks different for everybody. As it comes to first generation students, we're like, okay, what do you want to do while you're here? Yes, we are at a 4-year institution and the goal is to graduate. Cool. You can graduate. But in that, what else do you want to do? Do you want to do independent research? Do you want to hold an executive position at some organization? Do you want to be a part of SGA? Success is not a fixed thing, and it's also something that changes over time as well. So I think if we have that mindset, recognizing that everyone is diverse and our understandings of success is diverse. So if, for example, I'm an economics major and my teacher knows everything that I need to do in order to graduate. But within that, also, my main goal may be that I want to help my family business at home. How do you, as a teacher, how do I then mentor you in a way that is beneficial? How do I actually see you and value you and your difference? Maybe I'm in the direction of the 500 company, but I see you as a student who wants to succeed, and I want to see you succeed and access that success. So how do I then put myself in your shoes, or then at least open my eyes or be open-minded to seeing a perspective that is different from my own?
Another thing that this has led me to think through also is the idea of pain points. So a lot of times when faculty members come with a challenge that they're facing in the classroom, that is a great time to have these conversations, because a lot of times those pain points are rooted in the issues and concerns that we're talking about. So great examples of that have been here. Faculty have been sharing a lot about how when they're providing students feedback right now, students are taking that as a critique of their identity, not of a critique of the method. And so faculty are like, I need help understanding identity development. I need help understanding the student's positionality so that I can provide them with better feedback in the course that's going to be useful and not be the stopping point. The other place that keeps coming up for us right now is around engagement. Faculty feel students are really disengaged in the classroom. There's been a lot of talk about the great apathy that's happening right now post 2020. And so being able to have conversations around, well, what is it that you feel engagement looks like, and how that might be a cultural assumption, a generational assumption, and what that means then for how we address some of those conversations and also bring students into the classroom. So we've been having a lot of conversations around this particular generation that's come in is not content to just sit and listen to our perspective on their lives, right? They want choice. They want the opportunity to bring their full selves into the classroom. We, for a long time here on our campus, have held a program called Voices. It's viewpoints on inclusive student experiences. We invite students to serve as a panel for faculty about their experience. It's a very structured experience. It's meant to be very safe for the students, and we do that structure for that. But what we find is that faculty immediately start to hear from their students all the places we've made assumptions that have led to missteps. And they make very quick corrections based off from what they're hearing directly from our students. But from our students, what we see is that they haven't been given space to put together the pieces of what actually might be happening. They just know it doesn't feel right and it doesn't feel good, right? And so by a faculty member taking a moment in their class to do kind of like what Tracie said, of getting to know where their students are coming and why those goals are so essential, they can start to shift and see like, well, maybe what I think engagement looks like isn't truly engagement. It's engagement for a certain population. It's not an engagement for everybody. And so for us, it's been those pain points. So we've been doing a lot of work on trauma-informed practice right now, because trauma mimics ADHD in every way, shape, or form. And so faculty are like, students can't prioritize. They're having trouble making sense of what's important and what's not important. And that's a gateway opportunity into this conversation around not just how, the 2020 COVID trauma is showing up, but how multi-generational trauma might be showing up, how familial and generational trauma is already present, and how those students are carrying more into the classroom than just what this blank slate that many of us assume they are. We've been also able to really insert Terry Yosso's work on the community cultural wealth model, which for our faculty, even folks who are not interested in doing EDI work, Terry Yosso's work is accessible. They get that when I say navigational capital is the thing that we as institutions of education here in the United States exploit. We exploit the student's ability to navigate us. And navigational capital was essential to surviving during COVID, and it has evaporated. And now students are asking us to help not only rebuild their navigational capital, but look at what we're doing that makes it difficult to navigate us. That's a gateway opportunity to the rest of her model around things like social capital, familial capital, linguistic capital, and aspirational capital, and most importantly, resistance capital, the ability to persist in systems that were not built for you to be successful. And so faculty, that really stuck with them of, okay, these are conversations I can actually have and think through how I either highlight capitals that they bring to the classroom that I've been ignoring, and I can also help replenish those capitals that have been depleted, but that we make assumptions and depend on heavily in the system.
It's very interesting hearing all three of you talk about DEI, but you all talk about DEI and the concepts very differently. I heard some personal challenges, personal experiences, UDL, success, and so many different aspects of DEI that we spoke about, which makes me think that do we as educators need to expand the scope of what DEI entails for our faculty learners, for them to then connect and find a space of entry into this work? Is there an opportunity for more awareness? Are we defining it not as broadly as we can? Just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I think this is where it gets kind of confusing because, talking about inclusivity, that's an umbrella term, right? Like, so many things fall within that realm. And so I think the access points, when we can make the language understandable in terms of the context in which the faculty are engaging with students and teaching, and, our instructors are doing that work, that actually, I think, can be really helpful, even though we do need to engage in other dialogues as well. In general, sometimes terminology can really hinder people from moving forward, right? Because lack of understanding of what that means, or I'm adopting this. One of the things that I've definitely have talked about and shared with our colleagues, our instructors, is really thinking about where you want to enter. As you mentioned, Devani, where do you want to enter this space? You can enter it in many ways, and we're not going to prescribe like ways. We're going to tell you frameworks and tools and things that could support you in that work. But really, there's a whole bunch of different ways to engage. And I'll just talk about some of the scholarship we've done. So our first book, What Inclusive Instructors Do, was published in 2021. And in that book, we did actually an understanding of various instructors who said they were inclusive and they use such practices, and what did they do? Well, lo and behold, what do we find? It's diverse, right? Like, there's a lot of different ways you can do this work and do it well, right? And still impact the students, get the outcomes that you're hoping for in your classroom experiences. Just recently, in our next book that just came out, we focus on student voice. So I was actually thinking about some of the things that Laura mentioned was student voice. And so we ask students these same types of questions, like, what do your instructors do that's inclusive in your courses? And so it's really diverse, and they'll say that too, but there's some foundational themes that really emerge heavily in their context. And we were also very sensitive to identity, et cetera, and that, et cetera. We add students if they'd like to identify, et cetera. We thought about students of variety of backgrounds as well, and we engage them as well. So that said, even our students, and this is why it'll be interesting to hear from our student on this call, they said there's a lot of ways to do this well, and so we just have to think about what makes sense for the context and the course in which I'm teaching, and apply, these various practices, go through this process of introspection about our own mindset around teaching and learning, and do what makes sense. And so there's numerous ways. So I think when we talk about this work, we're talking about so many different ways to do something in the classroom, in a classroom that is really going to be contextual and embedded within that instructor and how they kind of move it forward. There is diversity there, and I think that's a good thing. We don't want to be like, you only do it this way, that's the right way. There are certain things that are better. There are certain things that are poor, right? Like there's all this in between, right? Like kind of things that you can do in your classroom. So I think that's really important to communicate to our instructors, especially when we're, sharing so many different frameworks and tools and ways of thinking about this work.
One of the things that I think Tracie just said that it's really important is the context. So space and place matter. Where you're located matters. So when I do this work, we start with race because we're located in the US South. That's not the case elsewhere, right? And so a lot of people, when you think of EDI, they start in a black and white dichotomy regardless, as a nation. And that's not what that term means. And they've now added more letters. There's belonging, there's justice, there's, right? All of those things to me are about softening the language to make it accessible to folks who are uncomfortable, which is a white supremacy culture characteristic. The reality is this is about making sure our students feel seen and feel that they don't have to leave chunks of themselves at the door. So voices that I talked about, we've ran this program for almost 6 years, and we've have about 5 to 6 panels a semester. So you think about the number of students that have come through there, every single one without fail, because we do them around identity groups. Every single one without fail, students have said, I have to leave this part of my identity at the classroom door to survive, not thrive, just survive. And when you have to leave a chunk of yourself at a doorway in order to survive in a space, you can't truly learn. And so the conversation is about how do we allow our students to fully thrive being who they are, with the histories and the things that are written on their DNA present in those spaces. How you get there, it doesn't have to be prescribed. Identity is complex, it's ever changing. So I always have faculty that say, I just need the formula. Give me the formula and then I will show up and I will do it. And I have to remind them, if I gave you a formula today, it would already expire by tomorrow. It does not have a shelf life. These things are complex. We find out new things about identity and ourselves every day. The language is constantly evolving and shifting as we learn more about ourselves. We learn more about these unchangeable histories that we don't teach. When you want to talk about what's happening at the border and you don't acknowledge Mexican repatriation in the 1920s, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that it's not still part of the conversation. When you talk about slavery in a sanitized way, it does not mean that the trauma and the pieces and the parts of that history didn't happen, right? And that they're not still showing up in these conversations. We still have to talk about those unchangeable histories. And so the definitions of what those mean, DEI, EDI, DEIB, JEDI is the new term that is the justice EDI, right? The reality is they're going to have different meanings in different spaces and different positionalities. And that goes back to that first question about positionalities and why positionalities are so important, because they ground us in these definitions.
Yeah, to add on to that, DEI is a continuous journey. What I wrote down was like, don't rush it. Connecting with you saying like, give me the formula. I think with a lot of individuals or professors, they're like, okay, this is something else that's added onto my plate. So how do I just quickly get to it? But getting others to recognize that this is something that you continuously do. Like you said, it's an umbrella term. So literally today, we may not have a term for something that we'll have for tomorrow. I think also it requires a level of vulnerability. I think professors have to have a level of recognizing, even if it's not, I don't know what it's like to be a Latinx individual. It could be, I understand what it's like to sit in your shoes as being a college student. There was an assignment that I didn't understand. So taking the time to be like, hey, cool, I don't understand it. Let's sit through it. And from there, then you're able to build rapport. You'll be able to connect with each other and learn individual things. For example, we spoke with the core curriculum professors here, and they were like, in the individual meetings, we were like, how do you know that a individual is a first generation student? And it's like only in those one-on-one conversations that I'm able to learn those and learn about their identity, and they feel comfortable sharing that with me. So it's a matter of, you have to be forthcoming, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be also willing to hold brave spaces and not just safe spaces as well. Um, in a lot of aspects, we want to hold a safe space, and we're like, hey, I'll give an example. Went to a class, they talked about the Black queer experience, and they played a video that had like queer, like homophobic rhetoric, and it was just being played in the background. And so my teacher was like, recognizing that there is a extra level of oppression that is upon people of color. Cool, you give voice to that. yet you don't know the context or what that door opens up to. So when you play it, then students give their opinions based off of lack of knowledge, and or they do have knowledge, yet they don't feel comfortable sharing it. And or if they do share it, then you aren't able to hold the space necessary for it. I think when we do push for this more inclusive um, understanding of what academia could be and what it should look like, I think we have to be patient and understanding that it takes time. It requires that you are delicate with it, just because if not, then you are re-traumatizing people. Like you've all said, we come to campus with our identities, who we are. Yes, we may feel like, okay, this is the beginning of a new slate, yet when you still go back home eventually. You still sit in your room and you're like, oh, well, that same mindset is still there. So recognizing that students are complex, but also recognizing that you are complex as well. So we're not so different, just being able to connect with me and see me as a human person. Someone who, sure, I may be a first generation student, but like you, I'm resilient. Also, what I've seen is just because someone holds an identity, a marginalized identity or a invisible identity, does not mean that they are far behind. Like they are so far behind, and that they really need my support, or they need an extra hand, and like overbearing, kind of being like an overbearing parent a little bit. Recognizing that I got here on my merits. I didn't just get here just because I was first gen and you were like, hey, we got to check you off. Well, that doesn't exist. Your merits are what you get you here, and continue to keep you here. How do you all feel about being vulnerable, being straightforward with your students? There's a level of professionalism of that. I'm not sharing everything with you, but also it's a level of, for my students to feel comfortable to connect with me, they have to see me. They have to see my humanity. They can't see just the material.
Yeah, absolutely. So 100% agree. Like, and seeing all of the work we do with students, we also do a lot of the student voice sessions. We do student pedagogical partnerships and co-creation with students, and that allows that one-on-one kind of dialogue and understanding, which is really powerful. But with regards to some of the things that you're talking about in the vulnerability that the professor plays. Absolutely. I mean, everybody's going to have their own take on this, depending on their context and how they're teaching and who they're teaching and what they want to or feel should help, what they want to disclose to their students. But that aspect of humanity, I think, is strong and going both ways. To give one example, I mentioned before this idea of this who's in class, right? Information and trying to understand who's in your class. Some of our instructors who do it will actually use that information. They say they'll share it back to the class, and they'll share it back, right? And say, this is our community, right? This is who we are. But then they'll also share their own aspects and their own identity. So almost like their professor kind of path and journey and aspects of their own identities too, that even connect with what they see in their students and what their students shared. And I think that could be actually particularly powerful, right? In a class, and makes sense, absolutely, in that context. Maybe it'll feel like a better place to do that work. The other thing I wanted to mention is the vulnerability for those who find it more challenging. And I've definitely worked with instructors who are really trying to increase their approachability with students so they can see their humanity, because it's not always easy, especially with various, personalities or what, the way we carry ourselves, etc. But one of the things I've always recommended is to do these conversations with students that are one-on-ones. So like these essential hours, have all of your students come to your office just for informal dialogue. Get to know your learners in this way, because that will allow potential other opportunities, right, for you to engage in some aspect of vulnerability, maybe in your humanity, but also to learn about your students. So it goes kind of both ways, and build those relationships really early on. So I think that can be one powerful way to engage with that. The other one that I mentioned, we do a lot of work with student partnerships. So we partner instructors with students in terms of co-creation so that they can go to their classes, they debrief, they give feedback. And those conversations that they have are really powerful because students use very diverse identities, right? Like in backgrounds and experiences that come into this work with us. And the instructors really get a sense of a lot of different perspectives of students that they wouldn't understand. And that students sometimes can share their own struggles or challenges or experiences, obviously through their lens, and be able to engage in a greater awareness and understanding with the instructor. So I think there's a lot of ways to do this. Obviously, it's, you have to think about where you're doing this work, right? You mentioned place space, et cetera. I know Lauren mentioned that earlier, but those can be wonderful opportunities to help students see your humanity. And I've definitely seen a lot of instructors who engage in those approaches really see the rewards of it. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to continue to do this work. Like, even if it's a lot of time it takes to meet with all my students, right? Like, I'm going to do it because that allowed me to get to know them better. It allowed me to set the stage to relationship build, to show my, who I am as a professor outside of just being an academic and their teacher, and all of that. So that's one way, or several ways that I would actually answer that question. So thank you so much for asking me.
So I also spend a lot of time helping people think about cultural humility and what that means to walk into a space that way. So many of us who teach have not been trained how to teach, right? We're hired because we're a great chemist, not because we're great at teaching chemistry. And we're having to learn these things in motion. And so helping faculty begin to realize how we were taught probably wasn't the best way because we mimic what we've seen. And many of us have been told my responsibility as the instructor is to set this boundary between me and the student, and that I know all things, and that you're here to learn from me. And that's not truly what learning should be, right? And so oftentimes we start with the conversation of, what does learning look like? What does true learning look like? And who does the labor of learning in your classroom? If we stick with that model of distance between me and the student, I'm doing all the labor of learning. The student's doing none of it. And how is that fair? That's not what the student's here for. And you will get resistance from students because they've been told their whole lives that receiving banking model is learning, and we know it's not, right? And so as an instructor, the minute I can come into any space and realize that we are both learning in this space, it is a reciprocal learning space, and that we have to co-define what this space is going to be, that the better we're all going to have the opportunity to walk out of the space differently. And so sometimes that's even simply starting a class by defining some of this language. So even the use of the word safe space, I think, is a great example to the language piece of that. It's defined very differently for different people as whether that's the right term to use, not the right term to use. So in Indigenous practice, Michelle Tanaka's work in particular, she talks about, I can't create a safe space in a classroom because I can't control what gets said when people leave, right? The safe spaces in her mind are really reserved for healing spaces, healing circles, therapy, talking circles, right? My goal as an instructor is to create safe enough space, safe enough for us to share what we feel we can share, to challenge what we need to challenge, right? Versus, then there's the terms brave space. There's lots of different ways we define it, but the action is still the same, right? I'm trying to create a space in this classroom where my students feel like they can bring enough of themselves to participate in the labor of learning. I'm bringing enough of myself that I can help facilitate that labor of learning. And when you put it in those terms, it doesn't seem so scary, right? Because a lot of faculty will tell me, I don't want to mess it up, right? Back to your point of trauma, like, don't re-traumatize us. They're like, I'm going to make the misstep and I'm going to say the wrong thing. And it's like, but if I've started this classroom space, or I've started this experience with, we co-define it. We co-define that we're both human beings and we both bring humanity. We are not none of us are experts in all things because no one person can be. Then when I make a misstep, there's grace. because I'm already opened the conversation up to have a dialogue. I've already opened up space for students to help share with me my own learning, because that's how this happens, right? It happens through dialogue, not through me holding that boundary saying, but I'm supposed to be the expert. Because when we do that, if you say, I'm supposed to be the expert, I'm always supposed to have the right answer, and then you take a misstep, then you have created not just significant harm, you've prevented the student from ever seeing themselves as being able to be in the same place you are, because you just made a mistake, but you're supposed to be perfect. So then maybe what I know isn't right, because you've just told me I'm supposed to evaluate it this way, right? And so creating that space where we can do that co-creation together is really essential to helping define what that humility is going to look like.
Ethan, I love how you made all of us think about vulnerability, because a good partnership cannot come without vulnerability or authenticity, bringing your true self into the space. So I love that you took us all thinking inwards. And that also, like all of your responses, take me back to the internal work issue that we started this conversation from. I heard each of you emphasize on connecting the internal work to something tangible to bring that motivation. I'm curious to know, is there an example of internal work that you may have done as a practitioner with yourself that has now made you a better educator or a learner in these spaces?
I can answer first. For one, Ethan as freshman is totally different. Ethan as a senior. I'm actually about to do a presentation on that, where we have to do an autobiography of who we were as HSS majors our freshman year and who we are now. And I told my professor, I was like, be prepared for me to cry. But um, honestly, the internal work was, for me personally, was that I needed to become comfortable with myself. I need to recognize my own triggers, my own trauma. And I guess that also pushes into being a psychology and human service studies double major as well. A lot of internal work, self-awareness is really key. Recognizing where you are and where you want to go. So for me, recognizing that, okay, cool, I'm Black, I'm queer, completely recognizing and accepting those things as well. As I first got here, like, okay, cool, I'm Black, I already know that. But me and my identity as a queer individual was also a little shaky. So recognizing, like, okay, we need to become comfortable with ourselves in that. And doing that, you put yourselves in uncomfortable spaces. So you go to, I started my job in the CREED, the Center for Race, Ethnicity, and Diversity Education, basically because, okay, I am a freshman here during COVID. I don't know anybody, but I need to go to a place where I know that I am seen and other people will see me because they have lived a similar experience. I go to the GOC, going there, which is our gender and LGBTQ IA center. So we go there so that I see myself through a queer lens. I think internal self work requires that you know yourself to the best of your ability. So that way you are able to connect with other people. So that way you are able to empathize as well. Empathy is a really big thing. Recognizing the difference between what sympathy and empathy is. Empathy is more of like, okay, I recognize, I know what it's like to be in your shoes. I'm sorry that this is, that you're feeling this. I am going to try my best to do what I can to comfort you in this moment, to listen to what you need. Whereas sympathy is like, well, they're feeling sad. I feel so sorry for them, and then walking away. If we move towards this idea of empathy, for not only for other people but for ourselves as well, recognizing, like you've I've constantly heard, we don't know it all. We're constantly learning, and I think also we're in academia, we're so big to be like, I have to have all the answers when it's okay to say that I don't have the answers. I think we need to push to move in that direction more of being like, I don't know the answers. But if you do, or if you know where I can get the answers, please push me in that direction. Recognizing that leadership also pushes in the direction of recognizing that sometimes I need to follow back and do leadership and followership. recognizing like, oh, this individual is great at when it comes to showing empathy or being self-aware. I'm going to learn from them so that way I adapt this to my toolbelt of leadership skills and tools and resources that I have as a means of bettering the spaces in which I walk into, better supporting those who I see and meet in my daily life. So.
I think Ethan absolutely, added so much good things there that I would absolutely agree with, similarly experienced. Well, the only thing that I'll add is that, as Ethan mentioned, because it's such an ongoing journey, our own growth and learning, one of the things that I also would say is just the importance of feedback. So if we're going to keep growing, we should get feedback on it. I will ask people, what did I do well? What could I have done better? How can I do better at this work, right? And I think if we're going to improve on our own, we need that in addition to being able to ask people who've gone through these experiences, or they can give you that kind of feedback, or they have more knowledge and wisdom. But that's been a theme in my life. Anytime I'm growing, which is constant, which I hope is always constant, that I'm going to get that feedback right from people so that I can grow even more. And that's just part of who we are, part of, kind of a growth process.
The piece of this that I think it should be the overarching takeaway that you've heard through everyone is that this is an ongoing process. But that's because who we are is ever an ongoing process, and identity is that complex. So the example I always like to talk to folks about is Native and Indigenous identity here in the United States is extremely complex. And then lots of people have lots of opinions on who counts, who doesn't count. My family, it's a maternal line. The Haudenosaunee follow maternal lineage. Mine comes down from my father's side. So I'm not enrolled, and I've been told by many people I don't count in some spaces. And I'm very white coded for folks who are listening and can't see me. So for several years after my grandmother passed away, I put my Native identity on a shelf because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And I didn't fit in my own skin. I didn't fit in the spaces I was supposed to be in. And it was students about 10 years ago. I had lots of Native students signing up for my courses because they find the faculty members, right? I think that's the important piece, is that all of us who come from an identity group that's marginalized, we have a network of people who tell us where those safe places are, where those safe places aren't. And so I had several Native students in my courses who kept pulling me aside saying, Dr. Pipe, we have to talk about how your indigeneity shows up, because it shows up and it's comforting to us. And you're trying really hard to be respectful about something that I don't think that's the way it should have been interpreted. And so I started doing a lot of internal work. And that's how I came to my Indigenous pedagogy work, was with the students through the work here on campus. I always joke, nothing like a good identity crisis just before you turn 40 and have your midlife crisis. That's the piece of it, is constantly thinking about how the structure that we live in really influences how we make decisions about our own identity, and stopping to think about the moments where you don't fit in your own skin because your gut's telling you something's not right. And that's part of that internal work that has to continuously happen.
Wow, this has been nothing less than thought-provoking. Talking to each one of you made me think and question my ways of being an instructor, of course, in exciting ways that I'd never thought about. I guess this is exactly what Carla wants to do with her learners. Thank you for giving me that experience. And thank you for sharing your experiences and bringing your unique identities to this conversation. We are very excited to share this with Carla.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, honestly.
Yes. Thank you both, everybody, for your time today. It was wonderful learning from you.
Hi, Carla. Welcome back to the show. It's so good to have you here again.
Hi, Devani. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
You better be, because we had a lovely group of passionate educators who had a very heartfelt conversation about your learning challenge. Our panel consisted of Tracie Addy, Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning and Director of Center for Integration of Teaching and Learning Scholarship at Lafayette College, now transitioning to Rutgers University to establish their Institute for Teaching and Learning and Inclusive Pedagogy. We also had Laura Pipe, Interim Director of University Teaching and Learning Commons at University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And we had Ethan Lane Blake, who is a senior here at Elon University, majoring in psychology and human services studies. He serves in several different leadership roles. So, with a panel like that, Carla, my biggest challenge was to just let them go. I just wanted to keep the conversation going. I must start by sharing with you that each one of them echoed with your challenge and reinforced that there is no one trick that works for all kind of a strategy in this situation. But while they said that, they also had a lot of ideas to share with us. So hence we dove deeper into the relevance of understanding your faculty learners, teaching context, and tailoring an experience that will help them connect the internal deep work to something tangible in their discipline. This makes the process a lot more important than the outcome. Laura gave the example of universal design for learning and student success as good ways to frame why this work is important to faculty members from STEM disciplines. She further emphasized why understanding your students in your classroom becomes fundamental to the internal work that is needed to motivate the DEI work among our faculty learners. Agreeing with Laura, Ethan further problematized the student success space by explaining how success can mean different things to different students in our classrooms. So, if faculty members do not engage with the student's idea of success, then they may guide them in a direction that the student do not wish to pursue. Tracie shared the Who's in Classroom form that faculty members can use to learn more about their students at the beginning of the course to foster inclusivity and plan for inclusion in the work that they all do together. Tracie's team uses the results from this form as a mechanism to motivate the internal work. And in some ways, each of the panelists tried to make the internal work connect explicitly to something tangible that our faculty learners value. As we were unpacking the nuances of DEI, the panelists challenged faculty developers like us to use the same approach to teach faculty learners about DEI that they expect to use. So, something like understanding what success might mean for our faculty learners while we are trying to instruct these spaces. We discussed demystifying DEI work by creating multiple entry points, understanding positionality of our faculty learners, accepting the evolving nature of this work, simplifying terminologies, and empowering our faculty learners to define what this could mean in their teaching world. Every small step counts here, so encouraging them to take anything that feels achievable to them from their position. Diversity in practices and beliefs in DEI work is really the soul of this work. So, inviting everyone to bring their context and ideas is something that we can do as faculty developers. Ethan then posed a very interesting question for our other two faculty panelists to learn how comfortable they feel being vulnerable with their students to find a balance between being professional and yet bringing their authentic self to the class. So both Laura and Tracie agreed that bringing your authentic self to class is challenging for faculty members because that is traditionally not how they were taught, and as instructors, we somewhere subconsciously just mimic these systems that we have been a part of. Shifting the idea of learning as a partnership is an important first step to allow instructors to become vulnerable in learning spaces, to then be able to do the DEI work and the difficult internal work. And finally, we wrapped up the conversation by sharing the internal work that each of them have done. Ethan and Laura celebrated becoming comfortable with themselves and the various facets of their identities and using them as strengths in spaces where they go. Tracie shared her strategy of being an avid feedback seeker to continuously grow in her own awareness of herself. So their conversation felt like some real good reflection and deep work to me, Carla. So, what are your thoughts? Did this conversation spark some ideas for you and the work that you do?
It did. First and foremost, thank you. This is exciting to hear all the different feedback. One of the themes or the topics that really resonated is around this, how this connects to student success. At a place like my university, like Elon, that is a big component. And I do recognize that that is ultimately one of the motivating factors for faculty to not only teach with an inclusive lens, but perhaps how to work on their internal lens of understanding or enhancing their awareness around DEI constructs. So the fact that that came up, that helped me think about what can I do to have a stronger connection to this idea around how this internal work does help promote student success, and engage learning practices, which is the other piece that I feel like I heard as a general theme from the feedback of our colleagues, which again, engaged learning practices is also a big component, one of the pillars around teaching and learning on my campus at Elon. The other piece that resonated, and I appreciate Ethan asking that question around the vulnerability, because that is, my assumption is one of the areas that can serve as a barrier where maybe some individuals, right, based on we are educated more times than likely as faculty, we are educated, credentialed, researched, and taught, and have written books, some of us with the lens on diversity, and to come into a space vulnerable, to come into a space with sometimes being willing to say, I don't know, can be difficult. Um, Particularly when there is an expectation to be the person that knows about identity and all of these different constructs related to inclusive excellence. So I appreciated that question of how might it look to be vulnerable, or how to approach it as like this learning partnership. And so I feel like that's another component that I will definitely take, but I also think that how to look at it as we're engaging in this work individually or through this introspective lens, but it's in partnership, right? With our students, but also with our colleagues as faculty learners.
And the student success piece connected so beautifully with this idea of vulnerability. Every higher education institution strives to work towards the benefit of our student. So that felt like a very easy thing for, not easy, but that felt like an idea that was very real and achievable. And how we can create that entry point, as they were talking about, for students. And from the world of technology, I can tell you every time I have to go in front of faculty members trying to do a different kind of work, which is more tangible. But even in that space, convincing faculty members to do something because it is the right thing to do doesn't work so well. But if they know that it benefits their student, I see so much more engagement and motivation. So I was very grateful to Ethan to bring that up, and that also told me that authenticity is something that is very visible to our students. We rarely think about it, but in spaces and in work like this, our students can see when we are authentic and when we are not. So that question really opened my eyes to a lot of different ideas.
Absolutely. And that's one of the concepts that I think about also, in the sense of, and I think I mentioned this when stating my problem. I think my motivating factor is how often are we engaging in the type of development that we're expecting from our students? And I feel like the students that are coming into our college campuses are a little bit more attuned to that as well. They're paying attention to how faculty are using terminology or thinking about what are the ways in which they're teaching that is bringing in different, multiple different perspectives or through a DI lens. I feel like our students are attuned. And so that to me is one of the motivating factors around stating this problem. It's not just about it's the right thing to do, right? But it is about how we are supporting our students and also making an impact within our discipline. That type of learning and engagement that they can, enhance through that internal work can continue to enhance the field. And so I am encouraged to be more specific in how to integrate that. The other thing that I was excited about, you mentioned entry point. This does connect to some work that I've started with some colleagues in looking at the multiple different offerings, whether it's from my office or in collaboration with other areas like our Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning or other faculty and staff colleagues who are often developing opportunities for faculty to create some language around competencies that our offerings are meeting and how we can make that more apparent to faculty so that they can then decide what's the entry point for their development. Are there areas that I'm looking to grow in, perhaps more so around equity practices versus inclusive community building, right? Like I'm just throwing that as ideas of potential competencies, but it's really giving some tangible language and a tangible pathway for that ongoing learning. And that's a project that I'm working on. So that was encouraging to hear that, helping to identify an entry point was a strategy.
That conversation definitely taught me so much, and I'm so glad that you are as excited about it. I hope you can build something beautiful out of this that we all can then celebrate. But your panel truly was a moment of reflection for me personally, and I hope that's what our listeners also get out of it. Campus partners, as you said, can really become your advocates in spaces where you can't be. So those are some good strategies. So thank you, Carla, so much for giving us this opportunity to peel through your problem and learn so much in the process out of it. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you again for your time. Thank you to the panelists for their insight. I've written down some of the feedback, like the universal design for learning. Like I think there's additional tangible resources that I look forward to finding and incorporating in my work. Thank you, Devani, for hosting me as well.
Of course, there's always so much to do in this space, Carla, and always a great conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sure.
Limed, Teaching with a Twist was created and developed by Matt Wittstein, Associate Professor of Exercise Science at Elon University. Devani Taprani is Elon University's Assistant Director of Learning Design and Support and serves as a producer for the show. Jeremiah Timberlake is a class of 2024 Computer Science and Music in the Liberal Arts double major at Elon University and summer 2023 intern for Limed. Music for the show was composed and recorded by Kai Mitchell, a class of 2024 music production and recording arts student at Elon University. Limed, Teaching with a Twist is published by and produced in collaboration with the Center for Engaged Learning at Elon University. For more information, including show notes and additional engaged learning resources, visit www.centerforengagedlearning.org. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe, rate, review, and share our show to help us keep it zesty.